My son David said I was too dramatic, too needy, and too expensive to maintain. So he decided my blood pressure medication wasn't worth the monthly cost and stopped filling my prescriptions without telling me. But I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't helpless. While he thought I'd quietly accept whatever scraps of care he threw my way, I was already planning to show him what really wasn't important. Every single comfort he'd grown accustomed to in the life I'd built for him. I raised David with hands that never stopped working and a heart that never stopped giving. After his father died in a construction accident when David was only 8, I became everything. Mother, father, provider, protector. I worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, my feet swelling in cheap shoes, my back aching from lifting patients twice my size. I came home exhausted every night, but I still helped him with homework at the kitchen table, still packed his lunches with the good sandwich meat, still drove him to baseball practice in a car held together with prayers and duct tape. When money got tight, I ate peanut butter sandwiches so he could have real dinners. When his cleats wore out, I worked overtime for a month to buy new ones. When he wanted to go to college, I took out loans I knew I'd never pay off, mortgaged the house I'd worked 20 years to own, and told him to chase every dream he had because that's what love looked like to me. Sacrifice without question, giving without keeping score. David graduated with honors, got a job in finance, married a sweet girl named Rebecca, and bought a house in the suburbs with a 2-car garage and a lawn that stayed green year-round. I was proud. I thought I'd done something right. Raised a man who would remember where he came from and take care of the woman who'd given him everything. I thought love would come back around when it mattered. The first sign came when I had my heart episode 3 years ago. I called David from the emergency room, scared and alone, expecting him to rush over like I used to rush to him whenever he scraped his knee or had a nightmare. Instead, he sighed into the phone and said, "Mom, it's probably just anxiety. You worry too much. Can this wait until the weekend?" It couldn't wait. I spent the night in the hospital by myself, listening to machines beep and wondering when my son had stopped seeing me as someone worth dropping everything for. After that, the visits became shorter and more infrequent. David would stop by for 20 minutes, check his phone the whole time, and ask if I was managing okay without actually wanting to know the answer. When I mentioned my arthritis getting worse, he suggested I try yoga or something. When I told him about the leak in my kitchen ceiling, he said he'd send someone over, then forgot for 3 weeks until the water damage spread to the living room. The exclusion started subtly. Family dinners at his house became less frequent, and when they happened, I felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Rebecca would glance at David whenever I spoke like I was embarrassing them just by existing. They talked about vacations they were planning, home renovations, expensive dinners out, while I sat there calculating whether I could afford my copays that month. When David's company had their annual family picnic, I wasn't invited. "It's just for immediate family," he said, as if I wasn't the woman who'd created his immediate family. Then came the financial hints, dropped like stones into still water. "Mom, at your age, do you really need to be living in such a big house? There are some nice senior communities." Or, "Have you looked into Medicare supplements? Some of these medical costs are getting pretty steep." He never offered to help with those costs, just pointed them out like they were character flaws I should be ashamed of. I held my tongue through all of it, swallowing my hurt like bitter medicine, because I kept thinking this was temporary, that the son I'd raised was still in there somewhere, just buried under stress and adult responsibilities. I made excuses for him in my mind, convinced myself I was being too sensitive, too demanding. But deep down, something was shifting, hardening like a bone that heals wrong after being broken. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I opened my pill organizer and realized I was down to my last blood pressure medication. I'd been taking the same prescription for 5 years, 2 little white pills every morning that kept my blood pressure stable and my heart from working too hard. Dr. Martinez had been very clear. This wasn't optional medication, this was life-sustaining medication. Without it, I was at risk for stroke, heart attack, or worse. I called the pharmacy like I did every month, expecting to hear that my prescription was ready for pickup. Instead, the pharmacist, Mrs. Chin, sounded uncomfortable. "Mrs. Morrison, there seems to be an issue with your insurance approval. The claim was denied, and the out-of-pocket cost would be $340 for a 30-day supply." $340. My entire grocery budget for 6 weeks. I called David immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. "David, honey, I need help with something. My blood pressure medicine isn't covered anymore and I can't afford." He cut me off. "Mom, hold on. $300? For pills? That seems excessive. Are you sure you really need them? I mean, blood pressure medication is pretty standard stuff. Have you tried just, eating less salt? Walking more?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. "David," Dr. Martinez said. "Mom, doctors overprescribe everything these days. It's a racket. Look, I can't just throw money at every medical expense you have. Rebecca and I have our own bills, our own future to think about. You need to be more responsible about these costs." "But David, without this medication..." "Mom, you're being dramatic. People lived for thousands of years without blood pressure medication. Maybe try some natural remedies first? Cut back on coffee? I'll send you some articles about lifestyle changes." Then he paused and his voice got that tone I'd heard him use with difficult clients. "Look, I'm not trying to be harsh, but you need to understand that these constant medical expenses aren't sustainable. At some point you have to prioritize what's really important." "What's really important?" My life-saving medication wasn't really important. I hung up without saying goodbye and sat in my kitchen chair for an hour, staring at the pill bottle with 2 tablets left inside. That night, I took 1 pill instead of 2, trying to make them last longer. The next night, I broke 1 pill in half. By the end of the week, I was taking nothing and my body was screaming. The headache started first, throbbing behind my eyes like someone was tapping nails into my skull. Then came the dizziness, the nausea, the feeling like my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I checked my blood pressure at the pharmacy's machine. 180/110. Dangerously high. Stroke territory. I could have called David again, could have begged, could have made myself smaller and more pitiful until he threw me a few dollars like I was a charity case. But sitting in that pharmacy watching the numbers flash red on the blood pressure cuff, something crystallized inside me. My son had decided my life wasn't worth $340. He'd made a calculation, weighed my survival against his convenience, and found me lacking. But I wasn't done calculating either. I drove home slowly, my vision blurring at the edges, and sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper. I started writing down everything I knew about David's life, his comfortable life, the life I'd made possible through 20 years of sacrifice. His job at Meridian Financial, where he made 6 figures selling investment packages to people like me. His mortgage on that suburban house with the perfectly manicured lawn. His 2-car payments, his country club membership, his wife's shopping habits, their annual vacation to Europe. Then I wrote down everything I still had that he didn't know about. The life insurance policy I'd never cashed in, worth $150,000. The savings account I'd been quietly building for 15 years, adding $20 here and there whenever I could, now sitting at $47,000. The small pension from the hospital that deposited $1,100 every month. The house I owned free and clear, worth at least $200,000 in today's market. David thought I was broke, thought I was helpless, thought I needed him. He'd built his calculation on the assumption that I was a burden with nothing to offer except problems and expenses. But what if he was wrong? What if the woman he'd dismissed as too expensive to maintain held the keys to everything he thought he was entitled to? I called my lawyer, Martin Reeves, a man I'd known for 30 years since I'd helped save his daughter's life during a diabetic episode at the hospital. "Martin," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my head, "I need to update my will and I need to do it immediately." Martin came to my house that evening, bringing his briefcase and a concerned expression. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was serious, and the way I answered the door, pale, shaky but determined, told him everything he needed to know. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped David with homework for 10 years, and I told Martin everything. "I want David removed as my primary beneficiary," I said, sliding the original will across the table. "I want him removed from my emergency contacts, my medical power of attorney, and my financial accounts. And I want to establish something else, something that will make a real difference." Martin raised his eyebrows. "Eleanor, are you sure about this? Family disputes can be." "This isn't a dispute, Martin. This is a choice. My son chose to let me risk my life rather than help me afford my medication. He called my survival not really important. So now I'm choosing what's really important to me." We spent 3 hours drafting documents. A new will that left everything to the Eleanor Morrison Medical Fund, a charity I was establishing to help low-income seniors afford their medications. A revocation of David's power of attorney. A new emergency contact list that included Martin, my doctor, and my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, but not my son. "There's something else," I said as Martin packed up his briefcase. "I want to set up a monthly automatic payment to Meridian Financial, David's company." Martin looked confused. "For what purpose?" "Investment consultation services. I want to hire David to help me manage my financial portfolio. I want monthly meetings, detailed reports, the full service package. I want him to think I'm finally taking his advice about being more responsible with money." Martin's eyes widened as he understood. "Eleanor, that's strategic," I finished. "I'm going to let him see exactly what he gave up. Every month he's going to calculate my net worth, track my assets, plan my financial future, and realize that the woman he called too expensive to help was never the burden in this relationship." The next day I called David's office and spoke to his assistant, Kelly. I told her I wanted to hire David for financial planning services, that I'd come into some money and needed professional help managing it. Kelly was excited. New clients meant commission for David, and from the way she talked, business had been slow lately. "Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Morrison will be so pleased. He's mentioned several times that he wished you would consider professional financial planning. Should we schedule an initial consultation?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Tell him it's urgent. Tell him I need help managing a significant windfall, and I want to do it properly this time." Within 2 hours, David called me back personally. His voice was different, brighter, more attentive than it had been in years. "Mom, Kelly said you want to discuss financial planning? That's great news. I've been hoping you'd come to me for professional advice." "Well," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said about being more responsible with money. And you're right, I need professional help. Can we meet this week?" "Absolutely. How about Thursday at 2 p.m.? And Mom, just so I can prepare properly, can you give me a rough idea of what we're working with? Assets, savings, that sort of thing." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Oh, David, I think you'll be surprised. It's more than you might expect." Thursday came, and David arrived at my house in his best suit, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of confident smile I hadn't seen from him in years. He hugged me at the door, actually hugged me, and asked how I was feeling. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that he thought I had money to invest, my health suddenly mattered again. We sat at the kitchen table and I laid out the documents Martin had helped me prepare. Bank statements showing the $47,000 in savings. the life insurance policy documentation, the pension statements, the property assessment for the house. David's eyes grew wider with each page. "Mom," he said, his voice hushed, "I had no idea you had this much saved. This is substantial. With proper investment, we could potentially grow this into a 7-figure portfolio over the next decade." "Could we?" I asked innocently. "That sounds wonderful. I want to make sure everything is handled properly, professionally. I don't want to be a burden to anyone." David actually flinched at the word burden. "Mom, you're not. I mean, this is what I do professionally. We'll set up monthly reviews, quarterly assessments, maybe even look into some higher yield opportunities. This could really secure your future." For the next hour, he was the most attentive he'd been in years, taking notes, asking detailed questions about my expenses and goals, treating me like a valued client instead of an inconvenience. When he calculated my total net worth, over $350,000, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "We should definitely set up regular meetings," he said, already scheduling our next appointment in his phone. "Monthly at minimum, maybe bi-weekly initially while we get everything organized." As he packed up his portfolio, I asked casually, "David, I've been meaning to ask, how are things going with your finances? The house payments, Rebecca's shopping, those European vacations." His smile flickered slightly. "Oh, things are tight with everyone right now. The housing market, inflation, Rebecca's been wanting to redo the kitchen. But that's not your concern, Mom. Let's focus on growing your portfolio." After he left, I sat at the table and looked at the contract he'd given me. Professional financial management services. $500 per month, plus percentage fees on any investment gains. He'd signed me up for the premium package, the full-service treatment reserved for his wealthiest clients. My blood pressure cuff sat on the counter, a daily reminder of the medication I still couldn't afford. But now I had a plan, and every month David would sit across from me, calculating my worth down to the penny, never knowing that each meeting was a reminder of exactly what his priorities had cost him. The monthly meetings became a ritual that stretched over 8 months, each one more revealing than the last. David would arrive promptly, dressed in his expensive suits, carrying his leather briefcase, treating me with the kind of professional courtesy he reserved for his most important clients. He'd review my accounts, suggest investment strategies, and present detailed reports on my growing portfolio with the enthusiasm of a man who saw dollar signs every time he looked at his mother. What David didn't know was that I was keeping my own records. Not of my investments, but of his behavior, his comments, his priorities. Every month, I watched him calculate my net worth down to the penny, watched him get excited about potential returns and commission opportunities, while my blood pressure medication sat unfilled at the pharmacy. The irony was exquisite. He'd spend an hour focused intensely on my financial health while remaining completely indifferent to my physical health. "Your portfolio has grown 12% this quarter, Mom," he said during our December meeting, beaming with pride. "At this rate, you'll break the $500,000 mark by next summer. Have you thought about what you want to do with that kind of wealth?" I smiled at him across the table. "Actually, David, I have been thinking about that quite a lot." During these months, I learned more about David's financial situation than he'd ever voluntarily shared. As my investment advisor, he was remarkably open about his own struggles when he thought it might encourage me to invest more aggressively. His mortgage was underwater after a recent property value assessment. Rebecca had racked up $30,000 in credit card debt on home renovations that had gone over budget. His country club membership was in arrears, and they'd received a final notice about dues. Most tellingly, he'd borrowed against his 401k twice in the past year to cover expenses. "These are temporary setbacks," he assured me during our February meeting, while presenting charts showing my continued portfolio growth. That's why it's so important to have diversified investments, Mom. You're building real security for your future. My future. The future he'd decided wasn't worth $340 a month in medication costs. By March, my blood pressure situation had become critical. I was managing it with lifestyle changes, free clinic visits, and samples Dr. Martinez occasionally provided, but it wasn't sustainable. The constant stress of living with dangerously high blood pressure, combined with the emotional toll of my son's calculated indifference, was taking its toll. I'd lost 15 pounds, had frequent dizzy spells, and lived with constant headaches. During our March meeting, David noticed my appearance. Mom, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? Oh, just the usual aches and pains of getting older, I said, watching his face carefully. Nothing that can't be managed. He nodded and returned to his charts. Well, the good news is that your financial health has never been better. We're looking at potentially breaking into more aggressive growth investments. Have you considered increasing your monthly investment amount? That was the moment I knew it was time. I called Martin the next day and asked him to draft the final documents. The Eleanor Morrison Medical Fund was ready to be activated, with an initial endowment of $300,000. The remaining assets would be distributed to 3 local organizations: the free clinic where I'd been getting my blood pressure checked, the senior center that provided transportation to medical appointments, and a prescription assistance program that helped low-income elderly afford their medications. David was removed entirely from the will. Not reduced, not partially included, completely eliminated. Are you absolutely certain about this, Eleanor? Martin asked during our final meeting. This is irreversible. Martin, I said, pulling out my blood pressure log from the past 8 months. Let me show you something. I spread the daily readings across his desk. 180/110, 175/108, 190/115. Day after day of dangerous numbers, while David calculated my growing wealth in the next room. Every month he sits at my kitchen table and treats my financial portfolio like it's the most important thing in the world. He's earned over $4,000 in fees managing my money this year. But he still won't help me afford the $340 monthly medication that keeps me alive. Martin stared at the numbers, understanding. He's been profiting from managing your assets while you risk your life because you can't afford your medication. Exactly. So now I'm going to show him what's really important. The April meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. David arrived exactly on time, carrying a special portfolio he'd mentioned on the phone. Mom, I have some exciting news about a new investment opportunity. But first, let's review your current position. He spread out the quarterly report with obvious pride. Your total portfolio value is now $387,000. You've gained $43,000 in the past 4 months alone. At this growth rate, you'll be a millionaire within 5 years. I nodded appreciatively. That's wonderful, David. You've done such excellent work managing my money. I have complete confidence in your professional abilities. His chest swelled with pride. Thank you, Mom. I have to say it's been really rewarding helping you build this kind of security. I wish more families could work together like this. Actually, David, that's what I want to talk about today. You see, I've been thinking about family, about what really matters, about legacy. I pulled out a manila envelope from the kitchen counter. I've made some important decisions about my estate planning. David's eyes lit up. Oh, that's smart thinking, Mom. With assets like yours, proper estate planning is crucial. We should definitely look at minimizing tax implications, maybe setting up some trusts. Well, I've already taken care of the estate planning, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. Martin helped me finalize everything last week. David opened the envelope and pulled out the documents. I watched his face as he read, watched the exact moment when his expression shifted from confident professionalism to confusion to growing horror. Mom, I don't understand. This says you're leaving everything to charity. There's no family inheritance listed here at all. That's correct. But Mom, we've been working together for months building your portfolio. I've been helping you grow your wealth. Naturally I assumed this was for family, for future generations. You assumed wrong. David stared at the will, his hands shaking slightly. Mom, this doesn't make sense. Why would you leave everything to strangers instead of family? I'm your son. I've been managing your money, helping you make smart decisions. I pulled out my blood pressure log and placed it next to his investment reports. David, do you know what my blood pressure has been for the past 8 months? He looked confused by the change of subject. Your blood pressure? No, I don't know. Dangerously high. Stroke level high. Because I haven't been able to afford my medication since last September. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? You never said. I called you in September, remember? I asked for help with a $340 medication cost. You told me it wasn't important, that I was being dramatic, that I needed to prioritize what really mattered. David's mouth opened and closed silently. So for 8 months, you've been sitting at this table calculating my financial worth down to the penny, earning thousands in commissions managing my portfolio, while I've been risking my life because I couldn't afford the medication that keeps my heart beating properly. I tapped the blood pressure log. These numbers represent every day I've lived in danger because my son decided my survival wasn't worth $340 a month. Mom, I didn't know it was that serious. You said it was just blood pressure medication. You thought what, David? That my life wasn't really important. He stared at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised somewhere behind his eyes, the child who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants because he didn't want to hurt anything. I've spent 8 months watching you get excited about my money while showing no interest in my life, I continued. You've treated my portfolio like your most valuable client while treating me like your most expensive burden. So now you get to see what it feels like when someone decides you're not really important. David's voice came out as a whisper. You're really going to leave me nothing? I'm going to leave you exactly what you gave me when I needed help. Nothing. He put his head in his hands. Mom, I made a mistake. I didn't understand how serious your medication was. If I'd known. You would have what, David? You would have helped me. You would have treated my life like it mattered. I shook my head. You had every opportunity to know. You chose not to care. But I can fix this now. I can help you get your medication. With what money, David? You're behind on your mortgage, Rebecca's maxed out your credit cards, and you borrowed against your retirement twice this year. You can't even afford your own life, but you've been perfectly happy to profit from managing mine. His eyes widened. How did you know about? Because you tell me everything when you think it might convince me to invest more money. You've been completely open about your financial problems while remaining completely closed to mine. David sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the will, at the blood pressure log, at the investment reports that had meant everything to him an hour ago and now meant nothing. There's something else you should know, I said softly. The Eleanor Morrison Medical Fund that's receiving most of my estate? It's designed specifically to help seniors who can't afford their medications. People like me, people whose families have decided their lives aren't worth the cost of keeping them healthy. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Let me fix this. Let me help you now. It's too late for that, David. You can't undo 8 months of choosing money over my life. You can't undo the nights I've lain awake wondering if I'd have a stroke in my sleep because my blood pressure was too high. You can't undo the humiliation of sitting at this table while you calculated my worth in dollars while I was dying by degrees. I stood up slowly, my head spinning from the blood pressure spike that came with emotional stress. But there is something you can do. David looked up hopefully. You can learn what it feels like to lose your financial security. You can understand what it's like when someone who's supposed to care about you decides your comfort isn't really important. I pulled out one final document. This is a bill for 8 months of professional financial management services. Your fees, calculated at the rate you charge your premium clients, $4,200 plus expenses. David stared at the bill. You want me to pay you back the fees? No, David. I want you to understand that every dollar you earned managing my money was earned while you let me risk my life to save $340. I want you to carry that calculation with you. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my blood pressure cuff. I'm going to check my pressure now like I do every day because I still can't afford the medication that would make this unnecessary. And you're going to sit there and watch those numbers and think about how much my life was worth to you when I needed help. The cuff inflated around my arm and we both watched the digital display. 185/112. Dangerously high. Every month you've celebrated when these investment numbers went up, I said, showing him the portfolio report. But you've never once asked about these numbers. I showed him the blood pressure reading, even though these are the numbers that determine whether I live or die. David was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You calculated. And your calculation told you that my life was worth less than your convenience. I sat back down across from him. So now you get to live with that calculation too. I pulled out my phone and showed him the banking app. I'm transferring the money to the medical fund right now. $300,000, gone in 30 seconds. The same amount of time it took you to decide my medication wasn't important. David watched the screen as I confirmed the transfer. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. I looked at him steadily. And David, every time you drive by a senior center, every time you see an elderly person at the pharmacy counting pills, every time you hear about someone rationing medication because they can't afford it, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you had the power to help someone you love and you chose not to. He sat there for a long time, staring at the documents, at the blood pressure cuff, at the phone showing the completed transfer. Finally, he looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What happens now? Now you leave, I said quietly. And you figure out how to live with the choice you made. And I figure out how to live with the choice I made too. David gathered his papers slowly, his hands shaking. At the door he turned back one more time. Mom, is there any way, anything I can do to change your mind? I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd raised with everything I had. This stranger who'd calculated my worth and found it lacking. You could start by asking me how I'm feeling instead of how my portfolio is performing. How are you feeling, Mom? Like I'm finally free, I said and closed the door. That was 6 months ago. David never called after that day, never knocked on my door, never sent a card or a text. I heard through Mrs. Patterson that he and Rebecca lost the house 3 months later, that they moved into a rental apartment across town, that he took a job at a smaller firm with lower commissions. I heard Rebecca left him shortly after that, took half of what little they had left, and moved back to her mother's house in another state. I don't take pleasure in his suffering, but I don't feel guilty about it either. There's a difference between causing someone's downfall and simply stepping out of the way when their own choices catch up with them. David's problems didn't start when I changed my will. They started when he decided his mother's life wasn't worth $340 a month. The Eleanor Morrison Medical Fund is fully operational now, helping 12 seniors in our county afford their medications each month. Mrs. Chin at the pharmacy is one of our volunteer coordinators, and she tells me stories about the people we're helping. The widow who can finally afford her diabetes medication, the retired teacher who no longer has to choose between heart pills and groceries, the grandfather who can keep up with his blood pressure treatment without asking his struggling children for help. My own medication is covered now through the fund, along with regular doctor visits and health monitoring. My blood pressure has stabilized, the headaches are gone, and I've gained back the weight I lost during those dangerous months. I'm healthier now at 73 than I was at 72, and I wake up every morning grateful to be alive. Sometimes I think about David, wonder if he's learned anything from losing everything he thought mattered. I wonder if he ever calculates the true cost of his choices, if he ever realizes that the $387,000 he was so excited to manage could have paid for my medication for 95 years. I wonder if he understands now that some things really aren't important, like pride, like comfort, like the illusion that love can be purchased with professional services, and some things are everything. But mostly I don't think about him at all. I think about the garden I'm planning for spring, about the book club I joined at the senior center, about the volunteer work I do at the free clinic where I help other seniors navigate their healthcare options. I think about the life I'm building with the time I have left, time that might have been cut short if I'd continued trusting someone who saw my survival as an expense rather than a priority. The house feels bigger now, lighter somehow, like it's exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I've kept David's old room exactly as it was when he left for college, but I don't go in there to reminisce anymore. Instead, I use it as an office for the medical fund, a place where I review applications from seniors who need help affording the medications that keep them alive. It's a better use of the space, a better legacy than preserving memories of a son who forgot what love actually looks like. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned something else. Respect is thicker than blood, and care is thicker than obligation. The people at the senior center treat me with more genuine concern than my son ever did. Mrs. Chin asks about my health every time I pick up my prescriptions. Martin calls once a week just to check in, not because I'm paying him, but because he remembers when I helped save his daughter's life all those years ago. These people understand what David never could, that relationships aren't transactions, that love isn't a business arrangement, that a person's worth can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. They know that sometimes the most important things are the simplest ones. Asking how someone feels, listening to the answer, and caring enough to help when help is needed. I sleep well now, deeply and peacefully, without the anxiety of wondering if my blood pressure will spike in the night, without the humiliation of begging for help from someone who sees me as a burden rather than his mother. The last thing I see before closing my eyes each night is the framed photo of the first 12 seniors helped by the medical fund, 12 people who are alive and healthy because someone decided their lives were really important. And the first thing I see each morning is my blood pressure cuff on the nightstand, no longer a source of fear but a reminder of how far I've come, how much I've survived, and how sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to see what their choices actually cost. Not just in dollars, but in dignity, in love, in the irreplaceable value of a life they thought wasn't worth saving.